The olive tree has deep symbolic significance across the Middle East and Mediterranean and is often revered in various cultures. The ancient Egyptians held it to be sacred to Isis, the Greeks called it liquid gold in the Iliad, and for Jews it symbolized peace in Psalms. Christians associate the tree with Christ's prayer in Gethsemane, and Muslims link olives to Prophet Muhammad. The olive has been cultivated in the Levant since the 8th millennium BCE, a region known by many names throughout history, including Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, and Palestine. Contrary to common misconceptions, Palestine appears in ancient texts, such as those of Herodotus. This episode will explore the origins of the name Palestine and delve into its rich history, from the Neolithic to the Roman era. Before we delve into the history of Palestine, it is worthwhile to first establish the origin of its name. Whereas many associate the term Palestine with the Roman Emperor Hadrian renaming the province of Judea, Syria, Palestina after the Jewish revolt of 66 AD, the name predates this considerably. Its origins are to be found in the writings of the Greek historian Herodotus, long before Rome began to rise to power. Indeed, the etymology of the word Palestine is quite likely to go back to one of the groups of the Sea Peoples, the Peliset, who was mentioned in the Mesopotamian sources and those of Egypt. Thus, long before the association with Rome, the term Palestine and its population had a millennial life. Palestine was known under many names. Its territory changed over the centuries. Eretz Yisrael, or the Land of Israel, is a term appearing in biblical sources referring to a region whose borders were constantly changing. Sometimes it encompasses parts of modern-day Lebanon and Syria, but excludes southern Palestine, which the Bible names as the Land of Edom. The term Holy Land, mostly used by Christians since the Middle Ages, refers mostly to Jerusalem and other sacred places in the Levant. Meanwhile, the term Canaan, which can be found in the text of the Bible, geographically encompasses the southern Levant. The historical kingdoms of Israel and Judah ruled over parts of this region, but at no time did they constitute all of Canaan or the Promised Land. Definitions of Israel, Palestine, Canaan, Judea, and Holy Land have changed over the years as boundaries expanded and contracted with political changes. In the Eastern Roman Empire, which lasted after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the region had been divided into 3 provinces: Palestina Prima, Palestina Secunda, and Palestina Salutaris. These provinces existed from Emperor Constantine to the Arab conquest in the 600s and 10s, excluding a brief Sasanian Empire period. The word Palestine has had its popularity rise and fall throughout history, having lived alongside many other identities that are culturally and geographically representative. Now let us turn back to prehistory and embark on the journey through Palestine's ancient history. In the Neolithic period, agricultural societies began to form along the Levantine coast. By the Bronze Age, these settlements grew, and Palestine, then called Canaan, was a clan-based society with urban and rural communities. These societies later developed into the biblical kingdoms of Moab, Edom, Israel, and Judah. The religion in this region at this time was likely to be a sort of Semitic polytheism influenced by the Phoenicians and other surrounding cultures. Canaan's position on the major empire's route meant it played a pivotal role in the geopolitics of that time, having trade relations with Egypt and Mesopotamia. Cultural entanglement was characteristic of the late Bronze Age in Palestine, with local populations worshipping a mix of Egyptian and native deities. A classic example of such syncretism is observed at the Fosse Temple in Tel Lachish, where a native proto-cult was intertwined with the Egyptian goddess Hathor. This period was a time of great transition in the region, the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age being one example, about 1200 BCE. This time, there is a name that would eventually be translated as Palestine, arising, possibly linked to a group of the Sea Peoples known as the Peliset. About the Peliset, not much is known, but their existence does appear in Egyptian records. Although some claim the Sea Peoples were responsible for the end of the Bronze Age through mass invasions, scholars question the idea of a unified group. It is also possible that cultural exchange occurred between these new arrivals and the existing populations, leading to a period of transition into the more decentralized Iron Age. The early Iron Age saw the emergence of diverse cultures and political consolidation in the region. One example is the Pentapolis, a confederation of 5 Philistine cities along the coast. Further south in Palestine, the Kingdom of Edom owned the Negev Desert, and the Kingdom of Moab held sway along the eastern Jordan River. The first known external mention of the Israelites dates back to 1208 BCE, when the Merneptah stele appeared. This was also the time when the events depicted in the Bible began to be in concert with historic records. The central and northern regions have the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, comprising different tribes. Archaeological evidence dated back to the 9th century BCE verifies the history of King David, the central character in biblical Israel. Monolatry was observed at this stage. Israelites were not monotheistic, though they primarily worshipped Yahweh while believing other gods existed. The first temple of Judaism, dedicated to Yahweh, was built in Jerusalem and marked the beginning of a more formalized monotheistic practice. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah continued to interact with neighboring powers, trading and warring as the Iron Age progressed. These interactions became more pronounced in the late Iron Age, as empires began to rise around the region. The biblical accounts of the reigns of King Josiah and King Hezekiah form the central part of the historical narrative, and archaeological evidence confirms their reigns. Two significant turning points in the region's history were the destruction of the Kingdom of Israel by the Assyrian Empire around 720 BCE and the fall of Judah to the Babylonians in 587 BCE. The Babylonian exile made the Jewish elites in Babylon that resulted in the change of Judaism from being a local sect to an internationalized religion of monotheism. The conquest of Babylon by the Persians freed the exiled Jews and gave them the opportunity to go back to Palestine, as Cyrus the Great established in 538 BCE. The period set up the Second Temple in Jerusalem, where all Jewish religious life came together. During Persian rule, the Jewish religion further changed due to the influences of Zoroastrianism, especially in creating dualistic ideas such as angels and demons. Persian rule maintained control over the area through its satraps, but collaborated with Jewish and Canaanite elite who lived in the local region. This cooperation stabilized the Jewish community in Palestine and how their religious institutions became what we know today. The Persian period was a major watershed in the religious and political topography of Palestine. Under their policy of religious toleration, the Persians exercised power through local intermediaries, including Jewish and Canaanite elites. The Philistine Confederacy of Pentapolis by now had probably collapsed, likely under the impact of the Babylonian conquests and then its incorporation into the Persian Empire's administrative system. Another notable development was the emergence of the Samaritans, a sect claiming descent from the Kingdom of Israel. They shared many religious practices with Jews, but maintained distinct rituals, including sacrifices on Mount Gerizim. Trade flourished during this era, with various peoples competing for influence. The Phoenicians in the north and the Kedarites in the south were among the prominent traders. In the 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great's army entered Palestine and destroyed Tyre on the way to Egypt. Traditionally, the legends assert that Alexander offered himself up in prostration before the high priest of the Second Temple upon his arrival in Jerusalem. However, it is questionable whether this can be relied upon as an accurate fact. After the death of Alexander, the empire that he had conquered was fragmented into various factions, with the region drawn into the wars of the Diadochi. The kingdom of Nabatea, which was composed of northern Arabian peoples, took over the southern Levant. The northern part was taken over first by the Ptolemies and later by the Seleucids. This quickly brought about a cultural split in Judea between the more Hellenized Jews and traditionalists. The tension culminated in the Maccabean Revolt of 161 BCE, which was also a civil war between these two factions of Jews. The result was the creation of the Hasmonean dynasty, a state of the Jews independent from the rest of the ancient world until it became part of the Herodian kingdom, which was subsequently absorbed into the Roman Empire. Under Roman rule, Judea became a melting pot of diverse Jewish factions such as the Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, and Essenes. The constant cultural interplay between Hellenistic and Jewish traditions led to the development of two new religious movements: Rabbinic Judaism, which focuses on legal and ritual obligations, and early Christianity. Christianity, as born from these traditions in Jewish law, or halakha, eventually emerged as its founder, Jesus of Nazareth, was schooled in Jewish circles. The Roman period also saw the rise of the Jewish diaspora, a process begun during the Babylonian exile and expanded through trade. Although the Roman authorities suppressed the Jewish manifestations in such uprisings as those of 66 CE and 132 to 136 CE, Rabbinic Judaism survived. After increasing the severity of action to quell the rebellion, the Romans saw the coming of Constantine when Palestine already was a complex center with Jewish, Samaritan, pagan, Gnostic, and Christian people. Fading out with the later days of the Roman Empire, Christianity came into greater influence. Yet Jewish people and Samaritans continue to thrive to this date. This long and complicated history of Palestine, which had diverse religious and cultural influences, continued to be the central point of argument and connection through the ages. Names like Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, Zion, and Palestine, and even the term Holy Land, were able to symbolize this ever-changing identity of the region and its importance to the different religious and cultural groups.